A woman stood at the edge of a canyon in northern Arizona, staring at men who believed the ground beneath her feet already belonged to them. She held a single piece of paper in her hand, and they had no idea what it said. Subscribe for real Western stories and comment where you're watching from. Her name was Kaya, and she had lived on this stretch of high desert plateau for 23 years. She had not been born here. Her mother brought her west after her father died in a rail accident outside Flagstaff. That was 1891. Kaya was 11. Her mother worked laundry in town and saved enough to buy 5 acres from a land agent who needed quick cash and did not care who signed the deed. The land was rocky, far from water, and considered worthless by most. Her mother saw it differently. They built a small house from stone and timber. They dug a cistern. They planted what would grow and traded what they could. Her mother taught her to read contracts, count money, and never trust a man who smiled too much. When her mother died in 1899, Kaya buried her on the hill behind the house and kept working. By 1914, Kaya was 34. She lived alone. She kept goats, repaired her own roof, and rode into town once a month for supplies. She did not speak much. People in town knew her face, but not her story. She preferred it that way. The land had changed around her. Cattle ranches spread across the territory. The railroad pushed through. Towns that had been clusters of tents now had brick storefronts and sheriffs. Men with money began looking at maps and seeing value in places they had once ignored. Kaya's 5 acres sat along a ridgeline with a clear view of the valley below. A narrow creek ran along the northern edge during the wet season. It was not much, but it was hers. The deed hung in a wooden frame inside her house, next to a photograph of her mother. The photograph showed her mother standing in front of the half-built house, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back. She was not smiling. She looked tired but solid. Kaya had taken the picture herself with a borrowed camera the year before her mother died. It was the only image she had. In late summer, 3 men rode onto her property without permission. They did not knock. They dismounted near her goat pen and stood waiting. Kaya walked out from the side of the house, carrying a bucket of grain. She set it down slowly and wiped her hands on her skirt. The man in the middle wore a clean hat and a tailored coat. The other 2 looked like ranch hands. The man in the coat did the talking. He told her his name was Mr. Calloway. He said he represented a cattle company out of Prescott. He said they were expanding operations and had identified her property as suitable for grazing access and water rights. He said they were prepared to offer her a fair price. Kaya did not respond. He named a figure. It was more money than she had ever held at once, but it was far less than the land was worth if someone needed it badly enough to ride out and make an offer. She shook her head once. Calloway's expression did not change. He said the offer was generous. He said the company had already secured the surrounding parcels. He said it would be easier for everyone if she accepted. Kaya told him the land was not for sale. He waited a moment, then tipped his hat and mounted his horse. The 3 men rode off without another word. She watched them disappear over the ridge, then went back to feeding the goats. 2 weeks later, she found one of her goats dead near the creek. Its throat had been cut cleanly. There were boot prints in the mud, but no other signs. She buried the animal and checked the rest of the herd. They were nervous but unharmed. She rode into town the next day and spoke to the sheriff. He was a tired man named Gorman who had been appointed by the territorial governor and spent most of his time managing disputes between drunks. He listened to her story, wrote nothing down, and told her he would look into it. She knew he would not. On her way out of town, she stopped at the land office. The clerk was a young man who had moved from Ohio the year before. She asked to see the records for her property. He pulled the file and let her review it. Everything was in order. The deed was registered. The taxes were paid. She asked if anyone else had requested the file recently. He hesitated, then nodded. A representative from the Prescott Cattle Company had come in 3 days prior and reviewed the same documents. She thanked him and left. That night, She sat at her table and reread the deed by lamplight. She had read it hundreds of times. She knew every word, but tonight she read it differently. She was looking for something she might have missed, some clause or condition that could be used against her. She found nothing. A week later, 2 men showed up at dawn. They were not the same men as before. These 2 were younger, rougher. They did not introduce themselves. They told her the company needed to survey the creek for a water diversion project. They said they had legal authorization. Kaya asked to see the paperwork. One of them laughed. The other told her to step aside. She did not move. They walked past her anyway. She followed them to the creek and watched as they paced off distances and drove stakes into the ground. They worked for an hour, then packed their tools and rode off. She pulled the stakes out of the ground and threw them into the canyon. The next morning, the stakes were back. This time there were more of them, running in a line from the creek toward the main road 2 miles south. She pulled them out again. This went on for 5 days. On the 6th day, Calloway returned. This time he brought a man in a suit who carried a leather folder. The man introduced himself as an attorney. He opened the folder and showed Kaya a document. It was a territorial water rights filing. The Prescott Cattle Company was claiming access to the creek under a provision that allowed commercial operations to utilize seasonal waterways for livestock. The filing had been approved by a judge in Prescott. Kaya read the document twice. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. If the company could prove the creek was essential to their operation and that she was not using it for commercial purposes, they could divert the water. The attorney asked if she understood. She said she did. Calloway told her this did not have to be difficult. He said the company was still willing to buy the land outright. He said the offer had been reduced due to delays, but it was still fair. Kaya folded the document and handed it back. She told him the land was not for sale. The attorney said she was making a mistake. He said the company had resources and legal standing. He said she would lose. Kaya walked back to her house and shut the door. That night, she did not sleep. She sat at the table and went through every piece of paper her mother had left her. Old receipts, letters, records of sale. She found a small wooden box she had not opened in years. Inside was a bundle of correspondence between her mother and the original land agent. She read through the letters carefully. In one of them, dated 1892, the agent mentioned that the parcel included a clause granting mineral and water rights in perpetuity to the deed holder, as the territory had not yet formalized resource regulations. The clause had been added because the agent wanted to close the sale quickly and thought the extra rights might sweeten the deal for a buyer no one else wanted. Kaya had known about the mineral rights. Her mother had pointed them out once, joking that if they ever found gold, they would be rich, but she had not thought about the water rights. She pulled the deed from the frame and read the fine print at the bottom. The clause was there, barely legible, in small type. It granted the deed holder full and exclusive rights to all water sources on the property, including seasonal creeks, springs, and runoff. The territory had changed its water laws in 1902, but the clause predated that. If it had been filed correctly, it would still be valid. She rode into town before sunrise. The land office did not open until 8. Kaya waited outside. When the clerk arrived, she asked to see the original filing documents for her deed, not the summary copy she had reviewed before. He went into the back and returned with a dusty ledger. She paged through it until she found the entry. The water rights clause was recorded in the original filing. She asked for a certified copy. The clerk hesitated. He said it would take a day to prepare. She told him she would wait. He made the copy that afternoon. She paid the fee and rode home. The ride back took 3 hours. The sun was low and the air had turned cold. She kept the certified copy inside her coat, pressed against her ribs. She did not stop to rest. When she reached her property, she saw smoke rising from beyond the ridge. She spurred her horse forward. The fire had started in the dry grass near the goat pen. It had spread quickly, feeding on late summer brush and wind. By the time Kaya arrived, half the pen was burned and the goats had scattered. She dismounted and ran to the cistern, filling buckets and throwing water on the remaining flames. It took her 2 hours to put it out. When the fire was gone, she counted her goats. 3 were missing. She found 2 of them the next morning, huddled in a rocky outcrop a quarter-mile away. The third she never found. She walked the burned area carefully. There were no obvious signs of how the fire started, but the wind had been blowing from the south. The flames had moved north, away from her house, toward the creek. She did not believe it was an accident. She rebuilt the pen over the next 4 days. The work was slow and her hands blistered. She had no help. She did not ask for any. On the 5th day, she rode back into town and bought new fencing and nails. The merchant asked if she had trouble out at her place. Word had spread about the fire. She told him she was managing. He said he had heard the cattle company was pressuring landholders in the area. He said some had already sold. He said it might be easier to take the money and move closer to town. Kaya paid for her supplies and left. The weather turned in early October. The temperature dropped and the wind picked up. The creek began to dry as the wet season ended. Kaya watched the water level fall each day. She knew that by November, the creek would be gone until spring. She also knew the company was watching. 2 weeks after the fire, a different man arrived. He was older than Calloway, with gray hair and a calm voice. He introduced himself as Mr. Hennigan, a senior partner in the cattle company. He did not bring guards or lawyers. He came alone. He sat on his horse and looked around the property. He complimented the house. He said it was well built. He said her mother must have been a capable woman. Kaya stood near the door and waited. Hennigan said he understood there had been misunderstandings. He said Calloway had been too aggressive. He said the company valued good relationships with its neighbors. He said the company was prepared to make a new offer. The figure he named was double the original. Kaya said nothing. Hennigan said he admired her persistence. He said it reminded him of his own mother, who had homesteaded in Wyoming and raised 7 children alone. He said stubbornness was a virtue, but only when it served a purpose. He said the company would build the water diversion with or without her cooperation. He said the legal process would take time, but the outcome was certain. He said she could spend years fighting and lose everything, or she could accept a generous payment and start fresh somewhere else. Kaya asked if he was finished. Hennigan nodded. She told him the land was not for sale. He studied her for a long moment. Then he tipped his hat and rode away. That night, the wind grew stronger. It howled across the plateau and rattled the shutters. Kaya lay in bed and listened. She thought about her mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion and died before seeing the land fully paid off. She thought about the years she had spent alone, fixing what broke and making do with what she had. She thought about what it would mean to leave. The money Hennigan offered would be enough to buy a house in town and live comfortably for years. She could work less. She could sleep without worrying about fires or dead animals or men with legal documents. But the land was hers. Not because she had inherited it, not because it had been given to her. Because her mother had bought it, and because Kaya had kept it. She got out of bed and lit the lamp. She pulled the certified copy of the deed from the locked box and read it again. She had one chance. If the water rights clause was valid, the company could not take the creek. If it was not, she would lose everything. She decided to take the chance. Calloway returned 4 days later with the attorney and 2 armed men. They came prepared to enforce the water diversion order. Kaya met them at the edge of her property. She was holding a folder. Calloway started to speak, but she cut him off. She opened the folder and handed the attorney the certified copy of her deed, with the water rights clause highlighted. The attorney read it twice. His expression tightened. Kaya explained that the clause predated the territorial water reforms and granted her exclusive rights to the creek. She said any diversion would require her written consent. She said she did not consent. The attorney asked where she had obtained the document. She told him it was on file at the land office. She told him it had been there the entire time. Calloway's face turned red. He said the company had reviewed the deed and found no such clause. Kaya said they had reviewed the summary. She said they had not requested the original filing. The attorney closed his folder. He told Calloway they needed to leave. Calloway did not move. He stared at Kaya for a long moment. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. One of the armed men shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his belt. Kaya did not flinch. She stood with her arms at her sides, the folder tucked under one arm. Calloway finally turned his horse. He said nothing. The attorney followed. The two armed men waited a moment longer, then rode after them. Kaya watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then she walked back to the house, sat down at the table, and let herself shake. The company did not return. A month later, Kaya heard that the Prescott Cattle Company had filed for water rights on a creek 15 miles south. The filing went through without issue. She never saw Calloway again. But the winter that followed was the hardest she had known. The rains did not come. The creek stayed dry. Her cistern ran low, and she had to ride into town every week to haul water back in barrels. The work was exhausting. Her horse grew thin. The goats gave less milk. In January, a cold snap killed 2 of her chickens. In February, her roof began to leak and she had to patch it in freezing wind. In March, she fell while carrying a water barrel and twisted her ankle badly. She could barely walk for a week. She ran through her savings. The money she had set aside for taxes went to feed and medicine for the goats. The money for repairs went to buy enough food to last until spring. She thought about Hennigan's offer more than once, but she did not leave. In April, the rains finally came. The creek filled and the grass turned green. Kaya's ankle healed. The goats recovered. She replanted the garden and repaired the sections of fence that had rotted over the winter. She continued living on her land. She kept the certified copy of her deed in the locked box under her bed. People in town began to talk. Word spread about the woman who had turned away the cattle company. Some admired her. Others thought she had been lucky. A few believed she had used some kind of trick. One afternoon in late spring, Kaya was in town buying seed when a man approached her. He was a rancher she recognized but had never spoken to. He owned land to the west, near the base of the plateau. He said he had heard what happened with the cattle company. He said they had approached him too, trying to buy a right-of-way across his property. He said he had been ready to sell until he heard she had refused. He asked how she had done it. Kaya told him about the water rights clause. She told him to check his own deed for similar language. She told him the land office kept original filings that sometimes contained details the summaries did not. He thanked her and left. 2 weeks later, she heard he had blocked the company's right-of-way using an old easement clause in his deed. Other landholders began to ask questions. Some discovered clauses they had not known existed. Others learned that filings they thought were settled could be challenged. The cattle company's expansion slowed. They focused their efforts in areas where resistance was weaker. Kaya did not seek credit. She did not offer advice unless asked. But her reputation changed. People who had dismissed her as stubborn now saw her differently. She was not softer. She was not friendlier. But she was respected. The following year, a family moved onto a parcel of land 3 miles south of Kaya's property. They were young, with 2 small children. The man had worked on a ranch in New Mexico and wanted to start his own operation. The woman had grown up in town and knew little about land management. They struggled through their first season. Their well ran dry in August. Their crops failed. By October, they were desperate. The man rode to Kaya's property and asked if she could spare water from her creek. He offered to pay. He said they just needed enough to get through until the rains came. Kaya looked at him. He was thin and sunburned. His hands were cracked from hard work. She recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same look her mother had worn during the lean years. She told him he could take water from the creek. She told him he did not need to pay. He thanked her and rode back to his family. For the next 6 weeks, he made the trip twice a week, hauling water in barrels. Kaya never asked for anything in return. When the rains came in November, the man's well refilled. He rode to Kaya's property one last time and offered her a side of venison from a deer he had hunted. She accepted it. The family survived the winter. The next spring, they planted again. This time, their crops grew. Years later, when Kaya needed help repairing her cistern, the man and his oldest son came out and worked for 3 days without being asked. Kaya continued to age on the plateau. Her hair turned gray. Her hands grew stiff in the mornings. She moved slower, but she did not stop. In 1921, a young woman from town rode out to Kaya's property and asked if she could work in exchange for lessons. She said she wanted to learn how to manage land and handle contracts. Her father had died and left her a small parcel, but she did not know how to protect it. Kaya agreed. She taught the girl the same things her mother had taught her: how to read a deed, how to keep a ledger, how to recognize when someone was trying to take something that did not belong to them, how to check original filings at the land office, how to calculate water usage and grazing capacity, how to repair a fence so it would last through winter. She also taught her that strength was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was knowing exactly what you owned and refusing to let anyone convince you otherwise. The girl stayed for 2 years. She learned quickly and worked hard. When she left, she bought her own land to the east and built a small house with money she had saved. Kaya visited once to see the house. It was well built. The girl had used stone for the foundation, just as Kaya's mother had. In 1925, the territorial government began consolidating water rights under a new regulatory framework. Landholders with old claims were required to re-register or risk losing them. Kaya rode into town and re-registered her water rights. The process took 4 hours and cost $12. The clerk who processed the paperwork was the same young man from Ohio, now middle-aged and balding. He remembered her. He said the company had tried to challenge her claim during the re-registration period. He said they argued the clause was invalid because it predated territorial oversight. He said the judge had ruled in her favor. The clause was binding. Kaya thanked him and rode home. She lived on the plateau until she was 61. In the spring of 1936, she fell ill. The young woman she had taught years before rode out to check on her and found her in bed, weak and feverish. The woman brought a doctor from town. He said there was nothing he could do. Kaya's lungs were failing. She died 3 days later on a clear morning with the windows open and the smell of rain in the air. The young woman buried her on the hill behind the house, next to Kaya's mother. She marked the grave with a stone she carved herself. Kaya had left the land to her in a will, along with the locked box and everything inside it. The young woman read through the letters and documents. She found the certified copy of the deed, still in its folder, and the photograph of Kaya's mother standing in front of the half-built house. She framed the photograph and hung it on the wall next to the deed. She lived on the land for the next 40 years. She raised her own family there. She taught her children the same lessons Kaya had taught her. When developers came in the 1950s, offering to buy the land for housing projects, she refused. When the state tried to claim eminent domain for a highway expansion in 1968, she fought them in court and won. The deed still hangs on the wall of that house today. Subscribe for more Western stories like this, and share what this story meant to you.